Well, this is Morning Live. Thanks so much for being with us. At about the time the United Nations released its report on the South African unemployment crisis in South Africa last week, ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula reportedly admitted that the ANC has only managed to create 21,000 jobs in the past 5 years. Now, notably, the country is faced with an official unemployment rate of about 33%, one of the highest in the world. Now, over 60% rather of young South Africans are unemployed and they live under the poverty line. Talking to the BBC recently, Mbalula defended the ANC's economic record and maintained that South Africa is recovering well. But economist Duma Gqubule says that almost 30 years in power, the ruling party cannot figure out how to grow the economy and cut unemployment. Duma Gqubule is the director of the Center for Economic Development and Transformation, and he joins us now virtually. Duma, always good to have you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
So let's start by talking about, and I'm sure many people are watching now, listening, are saying 21,000 jobs created in 5 years by the government. Is that correct? So let's talk about that, and also what kind of jobs these were, whether it's good or bad, given that government has always promised job creation, and of course the many job summits that we've had in the country. How should we look at this?
So I've been analyzing the whole unemployment crisis for quite a long time, and I cut and slice the data in any way that you want. So the first thing I did, I said, let's look at what happened to unemployment during this Ramaphosa presidency. And you look at the numbers show that we created 21,000 jobs. I can't tell you exactly which sectors they were because I wasn't looking at that, but the number of unemployed people has increased by 2.7 million. So we now have 11.9 million unemployed people. The unemployment rate, I prefer the expanded definition, which is more realistic in South African context, is 42.4%. The unemployment rate for young people, for youth, is 71%. I prefer that one as well. And the unemployment rate for African people is 47%. For African females, it's 51%. So the unemployment rate during this presidency has increased from 36% to 42% for people of all races. So whichever way you slice the data, I mean, whether you want to go back to 1996 or to whatever period, this has been a complete and utter disaster in terms of creating jobs. And as I said in that article in Business Day, that we haven't figured out how to create jobs, and I think South Africans must understand the scale of the crisis. Getting 11.9 million people to work, it's not something you can sort out through a few skills development projects in Tembisa or wherever. It's something that is a macroeconomic policy problem. It's about macroeconomic policies influence the performance of the whole economy. It's not something that we can address through projects. Now, just to give you understanding about the drivers of unemployment, the most important drivers is the growth of the labor force. Now, I project that until 2030, the labor force is going to grow by about 700,000 people every year. Now, to create those jobs, so the unemployment rate, you must create jobs for the people who enter the 700,000 every year, plus the 11.9 who are already unemployed. That is a huge task. So there's something called the employment multiplier. This is the relationship between GDP growth and employment. So each percentage point of GDP growth results in employment growth of 0.9%. So based on those statistics, what I show is that just to create jobs for the 700,000, let alone the 11.9 who are unemployed, we have to have a GDP growth rate of 4.9%. Now, since 1994, we haven't had this GDP growth rate of 4.9%. So the government must ask the question, do they want to solve this problem or do they not want to solve this problem? The only way to solve this problem, and I've said it many times, is that, in the National Development Plan, there's a target for 5.4% growth and 11 million jobs. But the problem is that nobody in government is responsible for achieving this target. National Treasury only cares about debt. The Reserve Bank only cares about inflation. So what you have to flip that script and say, there is a non-negotiable target for every institution in South Africa that we must have a minimum 6% GDP growth rate for the next until 2035. So I've done scenarios, what it would take for us to reach full employment by 2035. I did these scenarios for the South African Council of Churches. And what you see is that if we grow at 6% GDP growth until 2035, there'll still be 6.3 million unemployed people by 2035. But if we now increase what I call the employment multiplier, the labor intensity of GDP growth through industrial policies, we could create full employment by 5. So I think the objective of every political party out there should be to create full employment where everybody works in South Africa. We should not accept anything less. And if you have a Reserve Bank Governor and Monetary Policy Committee saying, no, it's not our job, we must just replace them. If you have a Treasury that says, no, it's not our job to create jobs, we must structure reform, we must replace them. We cannot compromise on this issue of achieving this 6% GDP growth target. It has to be a mobilizing vision for the whole of society, and everybody from the kid in the creche until everybody, the older person, must know that as South Africa, this is what we want to achieve here.
So, because you make some
every year that we don't do this, the problem becomes bigger. That's the issue. So every year we don't make the changes, it becomes bigger. Yeah.
And that is evident. The numbers bear that out, Duma. But you talk about the slow rate of GDP growth. So the sluggish economy, and very often we talk about COVID, but this predates COVID, the economy that simply cannot produce jobs. So if we look at all of those factors, is it possible to create jobs if you look at the contrast that you make, for example, with other countries that after 29 years, and I want to quote you in what you say there, you say, after 29 years of mismanagement, the ANC has still not got its head around how to manage the economy and create jobs. From 1994 to 2022, South Africa's GDP per capita increased by only 22.1% over that period. By comparison, GDP per capita increased in China by 738%, 337% in Vietnam, 315% in Ethiopia, 285% in India, and 216% in Poland over that same period. So what is it that we need to do?
I'll just give you another terrible statistic. Since 2000, for the past 15 years, our GDP per capita has not increased, and the outlook by every credible forecast is that we're going to have 3 more years of declining GDP per capita. So by 2025, our GDP per capita will be lower than it was in 2007. So 18 years of no growth in GDP per capita. And now, GDP per capita is an imperfect measure, because if we had to disaggregate it by race, let's tell the truth. It will show that the people who benefited are the white people and the rich people, and the majority of South Africans, they didn't benefit from this GDP per capita. So it's worse for the people at the bottom end. So I just think that there's so many distractions every day in South Africa. People just don't want to talk about this crisis. Man, they'd rather talk about other things. I think there's nothing else that we should talk about in South Africa, in Parliament and everywhere. On this, people must just talk about this crisis. We can't continue 18 years of no growth in GDP per capita, and everything is normal. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah.
So you and I have had conversations before where you've spoken about government spending. From 2003 until 2008, government consumption and public investment was between 5% and 14% a year, respectively. And then the economy during that period grew by 4.5% a year, created 3.1 million jobs. So why are we not doing what seemed to have worked at a certain point in time?
That's what I say, Sakina, everywhere I go, is that there was a period from 2003 to 2008. No, what I say, so let me start again. When the evidence of the past 3 decades shows that when the government spends on its people and its infrastructure, the economy grows. So there's 3 periods in the post-apartheid period era. from 1996 to 2002, we had the GEAR period, which was slash and burn macroeconomic policies, cutting government spending, cutting investment, which makes no sense whatsoever. And it was a disaster. Unemployment increased from 4.6 million people to 8 million people. It increased from 33 to 40%. Yeah. So now there was this period when we stopped this GEAR program and we started spending. So the government consumption spending, as you say, went up by 5% a year. Investment went up by 14%, public investment by 14% a year. And we created 3.1 million jobs. Unemployment came down to 28.7%. There was no jobless growth during this period. I don't know where South Africans get this, that there was job. There has never been, we created the jobs, 3.1 million jobs. And then we go back since 2009, the government stopped spending on its people and its infrastructure again. Now, contrary to what people think, the government hasn't been spending. There's been a collapse of public sector investments since 2015 of 38%. Now, the research shows that public investment has a very high multiplier of about 2.7 times, according to the IMF. It creates the resources to more than pay for itself. So I'm saying that there should be no budget constraint when it comes to public investment. That's what I'm trying to say here. So there is no solution. People can jump and try and find any solution. The government must start spending again. And people are going to say, the public debt. But our debt is not even high by international standards. And there are many ways that I've proposed to increase spending that don't even involve increasing public debt. I'll just give an example. During COVID, we created 60 billion rand out of thin air. You know, since 2016, people have been writing about this accumulating in UIF surplus, you know. So during COVID, many economists pointed up is, why do we have the surplus? There's no reason for it. And the government couldn't come up with a reason for the surplus. So they spent 60 billion rands to give unemployment benefits for people who are temporarily employed. So what I'm trying to say is that now that surplus is still at 110 billion rand. So there are many ways, if we start thinking if we innovate in terms of what we can do, there are ways we can spend that don't even involve increasing public debt, but people don't want to listen. That's what the part I don't understand. But there is no solution except this central bank must cut interest rates, because interest rates have got nothing to do with demand in the economy, and they must stimulate this economy. The central bank must finance the development finance institutions, and everybody must be geared towards this objective of creating jobs. There's no other way. Yeah.
And I think that's a good note on which to end it for this morning, Duma Gqubule. And I think echoing sentiments expressed by another guest, I think it was Dr. Buerta last week, talking about what the central bank needs to do. So as Duma says, you know, it seems quite evident what needs to be done, but nobody's listening. Why are we not listening? That is the million-dollar question, because here's some depressing reading for you about this particular subject. So in 2022, the South African economy grew by 2%. The world economy grew by 3.4%. Emerging and developing countries grew by 4%, which is where we ought to be. And then for 2023, the International Monetary Fund says that South Africa will grow by 0.1%. And here's where it gets really depressing. Only Ukraine, Sri Lanka, Chile, Yemen, and Equatorial Guinea will have lower growth than South Africa. Why? But that's where we're going to leave this conversation for now. Duma Gqubule is the director of the Center for Economic Development and Transformation, discussing unemployment and South Africa's economic performance. Let us know your thoughts. You can send us a WhatsApp voice note, or you can send us a tweet at Morning Live SABC.